The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war, and they will have to fight because it's NATO that we're talking about, and they will be dying, God forbid, because it's a horrible thing.
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters because it's nature that we're talking about, and they will be dying. God forbid, because it's a horrible thing.
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war, and they will have to fight because it's NATO that we're talking about, and they will be dying, God forbid, because it's a horrible thing.
And on that note, welcome everybody to the Rescue Michigan weekly live stream, where tonight we have a very special guest, Mr. Scott Ritter, who I almost want to say needs no introduction, but every man needs an introduction. And we can start by saying, I say with absolutely no exaggeration, you are one of the people that we can all thank for even still being alive on this planet, for the work that you had done during the Cold War on nuclear disarmament between the United States and the USSR. And since then, have continued to have an illustrious career exposing the deceptions that led to the war in Iraq, and most recently now as someone who is a critical voice in everything that's been going on for the past year in Russia and Ukraine. So I should say also, you are a prolific author, and what we just talked about is in your new memoir, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. Everybody should be encouraged to pick up a copy of that. But what we're going to be talking about tonight, for those who don't know, Scott Ritter has been all over the internet doing podcasts left, right, and center for the past several months. And he has his own YouTube channel where he interviews people, and he is he twice a week does a show with Jeff Norman where he answers your questions. So a lot of the stuff that we could be talking about in the day-to-day of what's been going on in Russia and Ukraine, Scott covers extensively. And what I want to do tonight on this show is really talk about the anti-war movement and the potential for there being something to happen in this country to change the way things are going. So, but that being said, since I know some people who are on this channel are not familiar with your work, Scott, why don't you give us kind of a basic synopsis, and I know that's a lot to try to encapsulate, of what's going on in Ukraine, how it started, how it's going.
I mean, how Ukraine started is we have to go back to the collapse of the Soviet Union back in 1992, and sort of a fateful decision made by the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush not to extend a helping hand to the new Russian Federation, but instead sort of put a foot on the throat of the prostate body of the new Russian Federation to keep it down, because the strategic thinking was that we never wanted Russia again to rise up to a state where they could challenge us like the Soviet Union had challenged us. And this, of course, this mindset was carried over into the Clinton administration. In the decade of the 1990s, from a Russian perspective, was the worst time since the end of the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, where entire cities were devastated, 27 million people lost their lives. The decade of the 90s, many people put up there as that sort of catastrophe. It was that bad for Russia that literally, I mean, the life expectancy of men dropped because they were just unemployed, alcoholics, and they gave up on life. The zero population growth, negative population growth, crumbling infrastructure, and the resources being basically stolen by oligarchs on behalf of Western, enterprises, companies, corporations, and the wealth of the nation was being taken out. Very bad time. The United States bought an election in 1996 to keep Boris Yeltsin, our loyal stooge, in power, people like to say Russia stole an election 2016. One, they didn't. That's just a total fabrication. Two, we did in 1996, and we brag about it by putting it on Time magazine cover. So, so we roll into, the Putin era, and there was a lot of resentment and throughout the American establishment towards a man like Vladimir Putin, who just refused to stick to the script. Russia's down, Russia's defeated. Your job is to be a compliant servant. And how dare you stand up and say, no, Russia is going to be a nation that'll rise to the level that it deserves to rise. Big nation, lots of resources, proud history. We refuse to be put down. Putin's never said, I want to challenge the United States. I want to be the Soviet Union. No, he just wants to be Russia. But we don't want Russia to be Russia. And that's how we got to where we are. You see, we've lied from day one about everything Russia. I want your audience to understand that. Everything you think you know about Russia, you don't know anything about Russia, unless you're a Russian studies major. But then again, where did you get your degree? Did you get it from Stanford, which trained Michael McFaul? Or are you up at Georgetown, where Angela Stent and others are imprinting you with the Washington, D.C. russophobic mentality? Because that's where we are today. We don't respect Russia. We don't know Russia. We fear Russia. And so we want to embrace policies that are designed to keep Russia down. And Putin just refuses to play that game. I think people might recall back in 2009 during the Obama administration, there was this policy called the reset, the Russian reset. Famous photo op, yellow box, red button. Hillary Clinton brought it up giggling to Lavrov, and he said the words misspelled, but I'll push the button anyways. Russian reset was code for regime change. And I think every American needs to understand that. What the Russian reset is to keep Vladimir Putin out, put Dmitry Medvedev in so Medvedev could morph into a Boris Yeltsin type figure from the 1990s. We also lied to Mikhail Gorbachev about NATO expansion. When the whole Soviet Union thing was collapsing, Gorbachev said, hey, we got 400,000 troops in East Germany. You want a unified Germany? You want to do all this? We need assurances that you're not going to move NATO into East Germany and by extension into the rest of the Warsaw Pact. We promise. And we lied. We just kept expanding NATO. So we have a situation now where, because Putin refuses to go away, the United States is embarking on a more aggressive posture. Rand Corporation 2019 wrote a study on how we can destabilize Russia. Think about what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, how we, the United States, can destabilize Russia. Could you imagine if the Russians put out a document in 2019 and said, how can we destabilize America? What if we did we surrounded with crises? What if we went into Mexico, overthrew the Mexican government, put in a pro-Russian government, and started this war on the border that could spill over into the Mexican-American population and maybe strip away California, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, strip that all away? What if we tried that? Or heck, why don't we go up to the Canadians and get them French guys in Quebec to rise up and cause problems and get other people to rise up? Maybe we can strip Maine away and Vermont and New Hampshire, and we can destabilize the United States. Do you think we'd sit there and go, well, that's okay. Yeah, okay. We'll just live our, or will we say, hell no, we're going to war? Okay. We have embarked on policies where we specifically talk about creating a crescent of crisis around the Russian border where we're going to go in and stir up trouble. Now imagine living somewhere in the crescent of crisis and you want to have a normal life, but the CIA comes in, buys off idiots to start blowing bridges up, blowing things up. Bam, you got a war where your men are dying, your women and children are displaced. This is what the United States is doing. And that's what we did to Ukraine. We had a coup in 2014. We deliberately overthrew a government. We brought in Nazis. I just want to say that, you're in Michigan. I had an uncle who worked for Kellogg's in Kalamazoo, Michigan for a long time. He made cornflakes, and I'm not joking. That was his job. But before that, Uncle Mel was in the U.S. Army in World War II. Went across the beach at Normandy, not D-Day, it was like D+8. So most of the bodies were gone. There's some dead stuff, some German prisoners of war, but it wasn't that bad of an experience for him. And he was he was in transportation. It wasn't the sexy job he drove a truck. And they had this thing called the Red Ball Express. So as the U.S. Army sweeping through France, he's sitting there running stuff back and forth, having a gay old time until they get up to Belgium. right around November timeframe. And that's when his company made a turn onto a road, and German 88s opened up, killed 250 of them that quick. Nazis killed 250 of his friends. They're buried in Luxembourg. I've been to that cemetery. And, it resonates when you have your uncle crying on his knees, almost puking because of the tears, choking back the memories of that day when he lost 250 of his guys. And then the war just got worse after that Battle of the Bulge, the whole thing. We went to war to defeat Nazi Germany. And yet today in Ukraine, we are enabling that same odious ideology. Stepan Bandera. He's a Ukrainian nationalist, ultra-nationalist, who worked side by side with Adolf Hitler's Nazis, murdering tens of thousands of Jews. In Babi Yar in Kiev, there's a monument to the slaughter of 40,000 Jews. You know who killed them? It wasn't the Nazis. Stepan Bandera. You know who slaughtered 110,000 Polish women and children from 1943, 1944 in the Volyn area? Stepan Bandera's boys. You know who killed 250,000 Russian civilians from 1944 to 1953 in a CIA-funded war? Well, initially it was funded by the Nazis, but then we brought in Galen's boys, Galen being the general who ran that program. We brought him in, made him work for the CIA, and then we continued that operation, killed 250,000 Soviets. 250,000 Soviets. Could you imagine again the Russians going to Mexico and say, what the hell, let's go kill 250,000 Americans right now. Let's spend a decade burning villages, stuffing people into farms, setting it on fire, singing songs while they burn to death. That's what happened. All right. These are the people we're supporting, America. These are the people we're supporting. Zelensky has gone on record saying Stepan Bandera is a hero.
I think I just saw that today.
To Ukrainians. And yet we're funding this guy. We're training the Nazis. And this is the war that we're in right now. Now, let's talk about the scope and scope, because, not every Ukrainian is a Nazi. Let's say that right up. The fact is, the majority of them aren't. It's a distinct minority who have bragged about their ability to turn 8 to 12% support into total domination through violence and intimidation. They brag. They come out and say it. They told Zelensky, if you dare sign the Minsk Accords, which was something that was supposed to stop this war, signed in 2014, again 2015, supposed to create a ceasefire, didn't do it. They said, if you sign it, we'll hang you by the neck until you're dead. Publicly have said that. I'm not making it up. And, if I came out and said, if Joe Biden does do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to hang him by the neck until Secret Service would kick down my door for cause. You can't threaten the president of the country, but the Nazis do. They control everybody through violence and intimidation. There are no political parties active today in Ukraine except the right-wing Nazis. That's the only parties besides Zelensky's party that's allowed to be active. Why? Because he can't shut them down. Because if he tries to shut them down, they're going to hang him by the neck until dead. Stepan Bandera is the national hero of Ukraine. The Ukrainian soldiers sing songs praising Stepan Bandera at their graduations. This is who we're supporting, ladies and gentlemen. But again, they're a minority. Let's talk about the Ukrainians you claim that were to be supported, because the Russians had this brutal, unprovoked act of aggression that took place. It wasn't unprovoked. We're the ones that wanted war. Russia's been trying to avoid war all the way up. But they wanted 8 years. They tried to get the ceasefire. It was the Ukrainian president, the German chancellor, and the French president who said it's just a sham. We're lying to Russia. We're just using it so NATO can build up a military to attack ethnic Russians in the Donbass that didn't want to be raped, murdered, tortured, and brutalized by the Nazis who took over from our sponsored coup. But no, we claim we want to support the Ukrainians. For all you anti-war people out there, they're saying we have to oppose the Russians because they invaded. What have you done by supporting Zelensky, supporting the Nazis, supporting the people my uncle went to war to fight? All right, I take this personally, guys. Take this very personally, and every American should as well. This is not some sort of, that was a long time ago, Scott. You need to get over it. Get over World War II. Get over Nazi Germany. Get over the Holocaust. Go to hell. This.
By the way, I don't think there's that many of those kind of people in our audience tonight. But I know. Well,
but there are some people that say, I'm anti-war, so I can't support the Russians on this. Okay, but by supporting what we're doing in Ukraine for the brave Ukrainian defenders, we're responsible for the deaths of over 300,000 Ukrainian soldiers. Let's go back to World War II. Combat deaths, total combat deaths of the United States of both the Pacific and European front approximates around 300,000. In 1 year, Ukraine has lost that many troops fighting. That's how bloody this war is. And we are solely responsible. You see, this war could have ended on 1 April. The Russians actually, when they first went in, didn't go in to destroy, occupy. They went in simply to put the Ukrainians at the negotiating table, and they had a deal ready on 1 April to stop this war. This war could have ended on 1 April. We stopped it. We prevented it because our goal isn't to have peace with Russia. Our goal is to be in conflict with Russia, to destabilize Russia, to bring Putin down. That's our goal and objective. So we stopped the peace. We've continued the war. 300,000 plus Ukrainian dead. Another 300, 400, 500,000 wounded. Tens of millions of Ukrainians displaced. $1 trillion of damage to infrastructure, and it's only going to get worse. Every time we say we're going to give X amount of money to Ukraine to support their brave defense against Russia, we slaughter more Ukrainian soldiers. We displace millions more of Ukrainian civilians. We destroy more infrastructure. So if you're anti-war, your best bet is to bet on Russia, because the way to make this suffering stop is for Russia just to get it over with, win this thing, and then the whole thing comes to a halt. If you bet on us supporting the Nazis, the Zelensky government, etc., all you're betting on is continued death and destruction. But that's where we are today, at a very pivotal point in the conflict, where Russia has woken up to the fact that the West doesn't want peace, that the West is using Ukraine as a proxy for NATO to engage indirectly the Russians to destroy them. And so Russia mobilized 300,000 people last September. The final mobilization's kicking in. Their military's getting in gear. They're having success on the battlefield, and the war is entering its final phases. One of the Russian strategies is to grind the Ukrainians down to nothing, and the key aspect of that is the logistics. Ukraine's running out of ammunition. They're running out of tanks. They're running out of everything. This is why Zelensky did the speech that you played up front. He's begging for ammunition. He's begging for tanks and everything, because he says, if you don't give it to me now to fight, then you're going to have to fight. American sons and daughters are going to have to fight. Hey, pro tip, Zelensky. No, we don't have to fight. And we don't want to fight. And we're not going to fight. The United States isn't going to put boots on the ground in Ukraine to save you, because let me give everybody here a hint. We don't care about Ukraine. We don't. If we did care about Ukraine, we'd never be doing what we're doing right now. If we cared about Ukrainians, we wouldn't be allowing 300,000 of their men to die. If we cared about Ukrainians, we wouldn't allow 10 to 20 million of their people to be displaced, $1 trillion of infrastructure. The nation destroyed. They've lost 20% of their territory. By the time this is done, they could lose another 30%. If we cared about Ukraine, we wouldn't have allowed any of this to happen. We don't care about Ukraine. We don't care about the Ukrainian people. We don't care about the Ukrainian government. We're using them as a tool, just like we use the South Vietnamese, just like we use the Afghans, just like we use the Iraqis, just like we use everybody that we claim to be their friends with, the Kurds. We will abandon Ukraine at the end of the day and leave them prostrate, dying on the ground with no helping hand, because that's what America does. As Henry Kissinger said, the only thing worse being an enemy of America is being a friend of America, because America's friends with nobody.
Right. And by the way, if you see my eyes darting about occasionally, I don't mean to be disrespectful. We are live on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and Twitter too. Rumble does not let me see the chats right next to us on my same screen, so occasionally I'm peering over another screen there. If you folks have questions for Scott, you can leave them in the chat. I cannot promise you he's going to have time to answer all the questions, especially because we've barely even started getting through mine yet. But we'll do
I'll
the
try
best
to keep
we
it
can as
shorter.
your time allows, Scott.
You pulled my string, man.
Yeah, well, just give you an open-ended question. Just tell us everything that's going on in Ukraine right now. So hopefully these other questions will be a little bit more pointed. But as you say, we're over a year in. Amazingly, because it doesn't happen ordinarily in war, Russian forces seem to be getting stronger by the day. Ukraine, as you say, is getting weaker and weaker, and Zelensky is constantly escalating. There's a lot of saber rattling in Washington. They're not talking, oh yeah, let's just add Taiwan into the mix. I mean, just lunacy. But I mean, really, do you think is this going to play out? Are we going to eventually give up as we did in Afghanistan, or are they going to really try to escalate even farther? Is this something that if there is not a political change in this country, that this is going to continue to get worse for a long time yet?
No. And the reason why is we can't escalate. I mean, the only step we can go up is nuclear, and we're not going to do that. General Cavoli is the commander of U.S. forces in Europe, Lieutenant General. He's also commander. He's a Supreme Allied commander, and he gave a presentation in January in Sweden. And pretty much what he said is the scope and scale of the violence taking place right now in Ukraine is beyond the imagination of the West. That NATO wasn't thinking about this. NATO isn't ready for this. They're not organized. They're not trained. They're not equipped. They're not prepared for this fighting. It's too bloody, too intense. It uses too much ammunition. It burns through too much equipment. NATO has been thinking small. This is big. And the reason why I bring this up is you can't escalate when you have nothing. I mean, and NATO literally has nothing right now. There's not an army in NATO. Everybody's like, wait a minute, it's a grand defensive alliance. It's not even that, guys. They tried to transition to offensive regime change. You asked the Libyans, asked the Serbians. They did, nation building, asked the Afghans, but they didn't do any of that very well. But they've allowed their military to deteriorate to the point where it is literally a paper tiger. There's nothing. NATO can do nothing. They have no troops. You say, well, they have thousands of troops. They're not trained properly. They're not equipped properly. They can't get out of barracks. They haven't maintained their equipment. The German Air Force is a joke. 60% of it can't even get off the ground because they don't have spare parts, and they've spent the last 20 years doing nothing. In order to get one battalion formed up to go to Lithuania, they had to cannibalize all of their armored brigades, the few that they have left. Those armored brigades today can't get out of the barracks. The British military, the vaunted British military, if you put all of the British military together in a big soccer stadium in Europe, the kind that hold like 100,000 people, you'd have 30 to 40,000 empty seats because that's how small the British Army is. They can't do anything. The French can't do anything. No one can do anything. The only people that can do anything is the United States, but we don't have enough troops. We don't have enough troops. We've got, I think we're up to 100,000 in Europe, but most of those aren't combatant troops. The ones that are combatant, they have no sustainability, no survivability, because we haven't imagined that fight. Our brigades go in with 18 artillery pieces. Those artillery pieces will be dead day one. And then we have nothing. And the Russians do nothing but artillery. And that's how this battlefield is going to be defined, with extraordinary quantities of high explosive firepower brought to bear. And we're just not ready for it. And America's not ready for it. You send a brigade of 5,000 guys into combat, you're going to lose 3,000 guys day one. Day one, boom, gone. And because we're not prepared, we don't have any other brigades to back them up. So when that first brigade gets burned through, there's no reserves coming in. So everybody dies. So this is why there won't be an escalation. NATO's Air Force, primarily American Air Force, hasn't flown against an enemy that has an integrated air defense system like the Russians have, the most sophisticated air defense, layered air defense. We've been out dropping bombs on wedding parties in Afghanistan, dropping bombs on goat farmers in Iraq with no opposition. And now we want to go up against the world's most dense, capable, advanced, integrated air defense. All our planes will be shot down before they got to their targets. We're just not ready for this war. We haven't trained for it. That doesn't mean we can't get ready for it. We're America. Of course we can. I mean, if we put our mind to it and we reallocate some of that $800 billion we spend every year on defense, we can start training again. When I was in the Marine Corps, we trained for this kind of fight. This is the fight. The fight they're fighting in Ukraine right now is what I train for 24/7. I know this fight. And but I know what it takes to get ready for that fight, the level of commitment, the level of training. We're not doing it right now. We're just not doing it. And as a result, if we tried to do it, we'd be slaughtered. And General Cavoli knows that. Every other general in America knows that. That's why all this political rhetoric about escalation and all this stuff, it's meaningless. I mean, Victoria Nuland, who talks about the need to go to Crimea, it's just words. There's no resources to back that up, none whatsoever. And so I don't see this escalating. Fact is, what I see right now is the United States is desperate to find a negotiated settlement, but they don't know how to get there because they back themselves into a rhetorical corner, and they've taken Europe with them. So there's literally no opening for Russia. I think the Russians would take advantage of of a negotiated settlement, even though they're winning right now, because the Russians really aren't in the business of killing Ukrainians. They're very good at it, but they don't want to be good at it. They didn't want to get in this position. They went in soft initially. We're the ones who turned this into a proxy conflict. But Russia would gladly find an acceptable negotiated settlement to this. But we're unreasonable. We come up with unrealistic propositions, such as Crimea must be returned to Ukraine. It will never be returned to Ukraine. And those 4 territories that Russia annexed in September, they're never going to go back to Ukraine. And if you don't accept that, then what's going to happen is this conflict's going to continue. Listen to what Vladimir Putin said on 21 February. He said, we will push past the borders of Russia, that includes all the new territories, to the range of the longest range system that NATO provides to the Ukrainian army. So we've given them the HIMARS rocket system with this small bomb warhead that goes 150 kilometers. So we just condemned Ukraine to lose 150 kilometers deeper than what they've already lost. That means the cities of Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, those are pro-Russian cities. There's significant Russian populations. As Vladimir Putin told the world back in 2005, his number one job as the president of Russia isn't for the Russian Federation, for the Russian nation. And the Russian nation includes Russian people who are outside of the borders of Russia. His job is to protect them, protect their interests. That means people who have common language, common history, common culture. He's going to protect them. That means Odessa is Russian, Dnipropetrovsk is Russian, Kharkov is Russian. And so Ukraine's going to lose all of that territory if they don't negotiate a peace soon. If they allow this conflict to go on, that's 50% of Ukraine that's never going to be back. That's the destruction of the nation.
And on top of all this, the foreign policy implications for this entire conflict have been absolutely disastrous for us. Our relations with China, relations with India, relations with the whole rest of the world, pretty much. And it just keeps on spiraling out of control. And yet, we still really don't see any kind of organized opposition to this. There was a rally in Washington a couple weeks ago. I don't feel bad about sneering at them since they snubbed you, but it was, it was not anything incredible. It was certainly not as big as the anti-war protests were, in 2003, even 2001. It was an odd coalition. I think it was organized by the Libertarian Party and something I've never heard of called the People's Party. And you wrote a column a little bit after that, and you said, as far as I'm concerned, their role's done. They got us to the starting line, helped fire the starter pistol. Now it's up to those running the race to finish it. And based on conversations that you've had with participants, it's a race that has to be run, and more importantly, must be won. And then you say the race is to have arms control by 2024. So 2 things to that. First off, is that the agreed objective? What about defunding the war? I mean, are these other people, and do you think that nuclear disarmament is the most important objective of an anti-war movement? And are there people in this group or others that are in agreement that has to be the policy focus?
Well, I'll say there's some people, other people have their own agendas. And I wrote another column before back, and I alluded to a scene from the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney movie. And he does a scene where he talks about the backpack and going on your journey and what you carry in the backpack that holds you down. And what I told the rest of the anti-war movement, and no offense to anybody, but you're not very good at what you do. Get the hell out of my backpack. I'm on a journey. Okay, I'm committed to something. If you're not committed to it, I'm not carrying you. I'm done, finished. There's no common cause here anymore. There's only one cause. And the reason why I've picked arms control is it's the only one that matters at this point in time. Down the road, we can get into nuance about defunding war and doing this, that, and the other thing. Right now, we got a military-industrial complex that's producing nuclear weapons. And we don't have arms control in place. They just suspended the last remaining arms control treaty. And when it expires in 2026, if we don't have another arms control treaty in place, we will have an arms race with no controlling mechanism. And given the lethality of the weapons were involved, it's literally playing Russian roulette every morning you get up. Eventually, click, you're going to hit around there goes your brain. But instead of your brains, it's the world going up in a nuclear holocaust. So whatever you think your little pet project is in the anti-war movement, it doesn't matter. Defund war, do this, do that. It doesn't matter, because nuclear weapons are there, guys, and that's the only thing that can kill everybody instantaneously. All right, so if you're not focused on the most important issue of the day, because nothing else matters, I don't care what you want to say. You can just come up with any one of your little pet projects. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And if they did matter, how come you haven't gotten any resonance in the last couple decades? Because it's political for you guys. You've turned it into a political thing. You can't win an election. You haven't won a candidate. You haven't gotten a candidate out there that could change policy. You failed miserably. So what I'm trying to tell you is stop playing children's games. Focus on the big issue. The first thing you have to do is save the world. Save the world, then you can move forward and do other things. And the only way you save the world is arms control. And I haven't met somebody who can convince me that they have a better project.
You know, the first thing we do is save the world. But no, in all seriousness, I just did finish your book, Waging Peace. And one of the things that struck me about it, and I just taught a couple of political courses this past few weeks. And, you know, the first thing one of the things I taught people is I have never seen a political organization be effective that wasn't top down. Every time they try to do rule by committee or rule by coalition, things fall apart. And your book is very on point about that the anti-war movement cannot be this amorphous blob. It has to be an organization with a leader, with a field general, you know, and everybody else is, you know, there has to be a chain of command. And I don't see any organization that fits that bill at this point. I know Dr. Paul spoke at the rally in Washington. I work for an organization he started, not his anti-war institute, but Campaign for Liberty is his political action group that's focused on principally monetary policy, the Federal Reserve, civil liberties, things of that nature. And he started that in 2008 after his 2008 campaign. In 2012 is when he started the Ron Paul Institute. And I remember thinking, it's got to be a C4. And for those, by the way, who are watching who don't know what the difference is between a C4 and a C3, C4s are political action groups that can apply pain on politicians, that can impose their will by saying, you're going to do this, or we're going to cause you some pain in election season. Whereas C3s are very limited by their tax status. They can educate, but they can't mobilize. And that's what seems to be lacking here, is that there isn't an anti-war organization that's incorporated as a group that's job is to apply political consequences to politicians. Nobody in Washington fears any of these people. There's no connection between doing the wrong thing, whether it's on Ukraine or the START Treaty or anything else, and damage when you have a bunch of angry voters coming at you in the election. There's no one doing that. Is there anybody out there off the top of your head, or do you want to be the one to start it, who's going to actually say, we need an organization that says, here's how we get things done. We have someone that's a fundraising director. We have someone that's a membership director. We have someone who's a political director, and they're going to hold people in Washington accountable if they keep doing this crap.
Yeah, you're looking at them. I mean, I may not be the guy that ends up running the whole thing, but I've just told everybody right now, I'm not playing any games anymore. Look, I beat my head against the wall trying to stop the Iraq war. I put everything on the line. I even went over and joined the anti-war movement. And then Barack Obama got elected, and where'd it go? It disappeared, because it wasn't an anti-war movement. It was an anti-George W. Bush movement. Yep. All right. And so the hell with you guys. I'm done with that game. I'm not playing Kumbaya anymore. I'm not here to hold hands, sing songs, and all that. I'm here to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to put arms control on the agenda, the political agenda in 2024. And you're looking for a C4? We're going to have C4, because the C4 is basically this. We're going to get as many people as we can to say that there's a litmus test. It's called the arms control litmus test. And unless a politician is willing to sign a statement that says, I am committed to make arms control my number one policy priority in the 2024 election going forward, because we have to have a replacement treaty by 2026. If we don't, we're all going to die. All right. And I'm not just making that up. We're all going to die, because there will be a mistake made. And when you have a hyper situation where the U.S. and Russia don't like each other, no more arms control, and they're building more and more lethal weapons, all it takes is one miscalculation, one mistake, one oops moment, and it's not a computer game, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't Call of Duty. This isn't Medal of Honor. This isn't whatever other game you're playing where if you lose, you get to hit reset and start over. If you lose the game of nuclear holocaust, you're all dead. And we are all going to die unless we bring this thing back under control. And we have one election cycle to do it. That's 2024. And so if you're not putting the fear of God into every politician running for office, then you're not doing your job. And there's only one issue again. All the other issues, they can come later. They can come once we've secured our future, when we can say we're going to have a world with our grandchildren, our children, and all this stuff. When we feel comfortable with that, then we can all get down to doing politics as usual. And I'm not denigrating politics as usual. That's what life is. Competing agendas and all that kind of stuff. Great, groovy, do it. But first, we got to secure the world. Arms control, and it has to be an arms control litmus test. And that's my focus. Singular focus. I have some people that say they like that idea. And I think one of the reasons why people should sign up for it is I'm not threatening anybody. I'm not trying to take your position. When this thing's done, I'm gone. I'm not trying to say Scott Ritter for this or Scott Ritter for that. All I want to do, it's just a very simple thing. I want to make sure that whoever's running this country in 2024, I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, I don't care. I just want you to give me an arms control treaty. I want you to say, we have to get this arms control treaty done. I'm not going to tell you what's in the treaty. That's your business. That's what you have experts for. I'm just telling you, if you don't do it, you don't get to be in office. And that holds for Congress and senators as well. And if the American people can't buy into that basic notion, then we don't have a country worth saving. I'm just being straight up honest with you. If you can't understand what I'm trying to tell you, then we don't have a country worth saving. If you're willing to allow little petty political squabbles to get in the way of getting an arms control treaty to save your grandchildren, then there's really not much for us to talk about, because everything else just doesn't matter. What do you mean? Gun control doesn't matter? Not if there's no world. Abortion rights don't matter? Not if there's not a world. None of it matters, because there won't be a world. Save the world first, and then you can get on with doing what human beings do, which is just screw up the world. But that's okay. That's all right. But we got to save it first, and arms control is it. And it's not going to be a kumbaya, nonprofit that has no power. This is a straight-in-your-face political movement designed to do one thing and one thing only: put arms control on the agenda for the 2024 election and make it the number one problem for all Americans. I don't care if you're black, Mexican, rich, poor. It doesn't matter, because you're all going to die, literally. So save the world. Believe in arms control. Embrace arms control.
Yeah, I think one thing an organization could do is, collect pledges from millions and millions of people saying, we're not going to vote for anyone who supports all this garbage that's been happening right now.
That's well, not all the garbage. It's not even that. I want to make it so generically.
Yeah.
I just want to make it so simple,
because they're shoveling our tax dollars to this war, all the rest of that stuff.
Yeah, but even then, I think this war is going to sort of self-solve it problem. I think this won't be on the agenda in 2024.
Yeah, but there's no consequences for these neocons. They keep staying in the halls of Congress. It's one thing after another.
Yeah.
And next,
but if we make it too broad, and that's one of the problems I had with the Rage Against the War Machine rally, is that it's an anti-war rally, and I applaud that. But then I looked at all of their agendas, and I realized that none of that's going to happen. None of it's going to happen, because you can't have a Tower of Babylon, and that's what you have. Because believe it or not, those agendas tend to compete with each other. So you all claim to be, an anti-war movement, but then, do you defund the war, or do you support the right side? Well, you can't have both. So that, to me, those are issues that can be worked later. And they're probably, people that, I can guarantee you, if we bring together this pro-arms control movement, when it's done, it'll fall apart, as it should, because it's a single issue movement for a single point in time. Because the people that we're bringing together probably disagree about almost everything. Almost everything. They disagree about everything. But they have to agree on survival. That's the thing. And I'm hoping we can do it. And if not, gosh, I'll just go, order up a margarita, sit on my roof, and watch for the double sunset. But because that's what's going on.
I think part of the problem too is this problem you always have with coalitions. There's another thing that we ended up talking about yesterday and this past weekend at this school. A buddy of mine who used to teach these kind of classes passed away recently. And one of the best columns he had, we talked about, was the dangers of coalition work. And anytime you get into a coalition in a formal manner, and especially if it's a bipartisan, nonpartisan type coalition, things fall apart fast because people want credit, people have competing visions, members get confused. Why is the left working with the right? People don't understand each other. There has to be one group, one focus. And it's, everybody wants to take credit for things, but the best coalitions are the ones that are just informal, happening behind the scenes, where we don't brag about who we're working with. We just get to
do the job. Just get the job done. And like I said, I'm more than happy to pour 100% of my effort in getting this ball rolling. And at some point in time, if people come in and say, Scott, let me introduce you to, Mr. X and Mrs. Y. These are really good people, good organizers, and it's time for you to step back, for them to step up and move it. As long as you keep going in that direction, I'm like, I don't care. I don't want credit. I don't want anything. I just want to make sure that come 2028, I'm around in case my kids have grandchildren, and that there's a world around when they have grandchildren. And that's all I care about right now. I don't care. I just don't care about anything else, because nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. I'm more scared today than I have been at any time. Remember, I've been around a little bit of time. I was around in the 80s when we did the INF treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And I know what the world was like back then. I know what was going to happen. I'll just give you an example. I sort of joke about it, but I don't really joke about it. But I tell people, when you meet me and other inspectors, shake our hands, buy us a beer, because we saved your life. If it wasn't for the INF treaty, you'd all be dead. And that's a 100% guarantee. How could you guarantee that? Well, I don't know. Let's just say that we got rid of the weapons, the Pershing II, that could strike Moscow in 10 minutes after being launched. We got rid of the SS-20s that had 3 nuclear warheads that would blanket all of Europe, which would trigger an American strategic strike. And if you say, well, okay, but nobody would be insane enough to launch that, I just point you to June 1995, when, if we had these systems in place, the Norwegians launched a atmospheric rocket test, and the Russian radars picked it up and misinterpreted it as a Trident missile coming in to do what's called an EMP attack, electromagnetic pulse, to blind all the radar so the rest of the missiles could come in for the first strike. They actually delivered the nuclear football to Boris Yeltsin, opened it up and told him, put in the launch codes. We have to launch right now, boss, or it's all over. They're coming in. The missiles are on their way. If we don't launch now, it's all over. He had a little bit of time to find out that it was a false alarm. If the Pershing IIs were still there, he had no time. He would have had to put in the launch codes, and we'd all be dead. So chew on that for a while, guys. Chew on it, because we'd all be dead if it weren't for the INF treaty. And I'm here to tell you right now, what we're getting ready to replicate is that scenario times 10. There will be mistakes, and there won't be any time. If we put the Dark Eagle missile into Europe, a new hypersonic missile that can hit the Kremlin 7 minutes after launch, no time, guys, no time.
Our military make a mistake? I don't know. We see this comment from Patty P earlier. Hey, military's got something, woke ideology. Yeah, those clowns aren't going to screw anything up. Hey, by the way, Scott, do you hear something? I don't. Oh, you didn't hear the sound effect, honestly?
The what?
You didn't hear that sound effect play, honestly?
I didn't. I'm deaf, though. I had things blow up in my ears when I was a kid. So.
I just did a thing on a soundboard that I was hoping people could hear. Maybe you can because of the stream, but no, a joker on chat just had to get blocked. So it was a scream of a guy getting tossed into a volcano.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if we want to comment on this at all, but let me just say, folks, you picked the wrong stream, because I have a family member who spent the better part of 10 years in a federal prison for a crime he didn't commit because of a politically motivated prosecutor. So if you want to talk about that, and Scott, you have no obligation to, but any joker that wants to bring that up, you'll get pretty quickly kicked out of here.
I mean, if
Anyway,
that's what they want to talk about, yeah, I don't run away from any issues. But I've made my stance on this quite clear and quite public. I'm not running away from anything. I'm not hiding from anything. And if that's what you want to talk about, then you're wasting
I don't think that
everybody's time.
Anymore.
Yeah. Because
either way, he can't speak anymore. That's for sure.
We're trying to go forward here, guys, to save the world.
Call Mr. Anderson when you can't speak. So anyway, I want to touch on another thing you wrote about recently, though, and that was that piece, Seymour Hersh's Trinity of Truth, which I found almost as invaluable as the Seymour Hersh piece itself. And I don't mean that to denigrate Seymour Hersh. The piece was explosive, although I think we kind of all knew that was what really happened anyway. But the fact that you observed these three things about it: one, the nature of the terrible crime that Joe Biden has committed, the most impeachable thing a president's ever done, and then two, the implication this should have for NATO, and then three, also that this gives away that this entire operation in Ukraine was provoked by the United States.
Yeah.
But in particular, this business about this impeachable offense of Joe Biden, it's mind-boggling to me that Republicans haven't seized on this. The Trump hasn't seized on this, of all people. After the parading of the two Trump impeachments, one for a phone call to Ukraine involving a corrupt prosecutor that he was that he had some, or no, not a corrupt prosecutor, a prosecutor trying to get to the bottom of some corruption that Biden had something to do with. You would think there'd be a change of narrative, and yet it's crickets. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, this is part of that full disclosure kind of thing that people. I've been friends with Cy Hersh for 25 years, and we know each other very well. In fact, it's just a couple of weeks ago, a week and a half ago, I had lunch with him, and we talked about this very issue, his writing and stuff. So I have a high degree of confidence in his reporting. Always have. I don't know who his source is. I don't want to know the sources. I didn't ask him. He wouldn't have told me. But I just believe when he writes it that he's on the right track, and he's not done. That's one thing he made clear to me, because I tried to embarrass him by saying that this, of all the work he's ever done, and I'm familiar with everything he's ever written. I said this is the one that may go down in history as your most explosive piece yet, because of what I wrote in the article, the implications of this thing. And he said, "Well, Scott, I'm not done yet. I've only just started. So there's more to come." And so who knows? Just people need to remember that the White House denied My Lai, the White House denied Abu Ghraib, the White House has denied just about every Seymour Hersh story, and then it always comes back that he's right. I remember when he wrote about Osama bin Laden. And he said that, this whole story that the U.S. put in about, the Zero Dark 30, the couriers and all this kind of stuff. He said, yeah, that happened. But what really happened is we had a walk-in from Pakistani intelligence who gave us Osama bin Laden on a platter. And everybody, no, that never happened. Seymour Hersh is making it up. Da 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 da. Never. Suddenly, yeah, I guess there was a walk-in from Pakistani intelligence. So Hersh was right, but they'll never admit it up front. And even today, they don't want to admit it. They'll say, well, Hersh didn't really know what he was talking about. He was guessing. No, he has good sources and they tell him good stuff. And that's what's going on with Nord Stream right now. But this is explosive. I mean, people say, well, wait a minute, Scott, what about George W. Bush invading Iraq? He didn't lie to Congress. Okay. He fulfilled his constitutional obligation to inform.
Iraq wasn't our ally.
No, he wasn't our NATO ally. Yeah. Here, he attacked a NATO ally and avoided the constitutional requirements to get the consent, or at least inform Congress that this was happening. This means he's literally a dictator who can do anything he wants with no consequence, and I don't expect, Congress to accept what Seymour Hersh says at face value and seek prosecutions and impeachment. But what about a hearing? Just a simple hearing to say, hey, did you guys have a meeting? I mean, let's pull out the White House records. And did Jake Sullivan, Victoria Nuland, and all these people named by Hersh, ever get together in the White House Situation Room. Let's get the logs out and find out what happened. Oh, you did several times. Let's talk about what happened back then. Where's the memorandum for the record? Let's bring that out. We could do it in closed session if you want, because I know it's probably highly classified. Oh, wow, what's this thing about pipelines? You guys are talking about pipelines on the day that Seymour Hersh said you were talking about pipelines. So maybe the Hersh story is correct. Maybe he's on to something. Maybe you guys are the scum that he says you are. But Congress isn't doing that. They're just silent. They're as silent as the Germans are. At least the Germans are making noise. You got some German politicians who are starting to say, demand accountability by Olaf Scholz and the German government, asking questions about this. But what did the Danes do? The Denmark, their territorial waters. They've taken the case and sealed it up and said no one's ever allowed to talk about it again. Why not? Because the implications of the truth could have a very serious impact on our national security. How? I can guarantee you that if Russia did it and you had evidence that said Russia did it, you'd be leaking that out. That'd be all over the headlines. Boom, Russia did it. So you're keeping it quiet because America did it. And that would have serious national security things. The Swedes did the same thing. Zip, boom, done. No one's talking about it. Germans won't even investigate. They won't even investigate. It's a $12 billion piece of critical energy infrastructure for Germany, and they won't even investigate. What does that tell you? That they're running scared. This is, again, probably the most explosive story. If people actually wrap their heads around the implications of what we did here, an economic Pearl Harbor on a NATO ally, carried out by us, America. We're supposed to be the good guys. Turns out we are not only the bad guys, we're the worst kind of bad guys. We're the kind of bad guys that stab their friends in the back.
Yeah, I still think there's got to be some way, and to get people's attention in Congress. But one of the things we often say about politicians is leaders come last when they're politicians. They got to be dragged kicking and screaming into doing a smart thing, and that's true for organizations too. I don't know what your personal opinion is about gun rights, but as an academic matter, I'll tell you a story about this gun rights group supposedly called the National Rifle Association. Well, a lot of gun owners think that that carrying is a constitutional right, and they have a piece of legislation they like called constitutional carry that says that the Second Amendment is your permit. Well, the NRA, however, happens to have a really good side business going with all these concealed carry classes that people have to take. So the NRA had to be shamed by other organizations to take on right to carry. And it wasn't until groups like Gun Owners of America, the National Association for Gun Rights, started saying, yeah, we want right to carry, that only then did the NRA finally come around. And it seems like all of these conservative groups out there, as soon as people start saying, why aren't we impeaching Joe Biden? Why isn't impeach Biden might be a good rallying cry. You'd think some people out there, probably about half the country, would be interested in doing that. And yet somehow all these groups aren't doing it. But
corrupted by money. Corrupted by money. There's interest. Look at who's making money. I remember, first of all, you're right. We didn't need Seymour Hersh's article to know who did this. We had a confession by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, on February 7th, where in front of Olaf Scholz in the White House, he said, if Russian tanks enter Ukraine, we're going to blow up. Well, not we're going to blow up, but Nord Stream 2 will stop. And Olaf Scholz is looking at him like, what? What are you saying? And so it took a German reporter to have more courage than Olaf Scholz, saying, what are you talking about? How could you do that? That's German. How could you do that? We're going to do it. That's a confession. Literally, you could convict in an American court of law with that confession. But then one big legal question is cui bono? Who profits? Who benefits from this? Enter Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State. The German pipeline just got blown up. And you'd think he'd be saying, our condolences to our German allies. We want to lead a full investigation here. This is unacceptable. America stands behind, this, that, and the other thing. This creates a lot of opportunities. For whom? Well, American liquid natural gas, who has to step in now to replace the cheap Russian gas that's no longer being shipped. So, we've made a lot of money on this. We've made a lot of money. And if you don't think Republican hands are, filthy with the money from American oil and gas, then you don't know anything about the Republican Party. So they're sitting here awash in money, just, and so the last thing they want to do is rock the boat and create controversy, because one of the consequences if Germany wakes up is that Germany will probably have no choice but to get out of NATO. And Germany will probably bring about the collapse of the European Union, the collapse of the Eurozone, definitely. And Germany will probably turn back to Russian gas, which will leave American LNG high and dry. So you can guarantee that Congress isn't going to be doing anything to further an investigation into the Nord Stream, because Congress benefits from this. Ted Cruz benefits from this. Anybody who received a check from American oil and gas, the fracking industry, all that, this benefits them. So they're not going to investigate this.
The funny thing is that one person who would have nothing to lose and yet somehow is still doing nothing is Donald Trump, who has, he doesn't have any interest Congress has. He, of all people, I saw someone in the chat asked, Trump recently said he knows how to immediately end the Ukrainian war. Could anti-war be the winning strategy to win the presidency? I don't think Trump has a thought in his head about what's going on here.
No, he's not very good. I mean, I know that people are going to, well, look, I was not a Trump fan early on for a whole bunch of reasons. And it didn't deal with this conversation on the bus. I can't say I don't care about that, but that's not my hot button thing. My hot button thing is the Constitution of the United States of America and his total disregard for the Constitution across the board. But I did, when comparing, contrasting Trump with Hillary, who also could care less about the Constitution. Trump said some interesting things like, why is NATO still here? Mm-hmm. Wow. An American president who actually asked one of the most relevant questions of our time. Why is NATO still here? And then the other thing, why can't we be friends with Russia? So these things maybe say Hillary wants to go to war with Russia and Syria by creating a no-fly zone that guarantees a force-on-force conflict that could turn into nuclear conflict. Trump wants to be friends. I'm going with the guy who wants to be friends. Despite all of his imperfections, that's the route I'm going. But then he became president and he couldn't operate. He got bogged down by a Democrat-led Congress that basically allowed a lie about Russian collusion to dominate and intimidate Trump, to the point that not only could he not be friends with Russia, but he had to go the other route, because you remember Donald Trump. I'm the guy who sanctioned Russia more than anybody else. No one's been tougher on Russia than me. So you don't want to be friends with Russia. Either that or you're not a very strong guy. Either that or you don't believe anything. And I think that's where we're at with Donald Trump. I mean, what's his option? Is he going to fire and fury Putin into a corner? I don't think so. So I don't think Trump has the solution. But the good news is, again, I think that Ukraine's going to be off the. We're not going to be talking about the Ukraine. We're going to be talking about the post-Ukraine conflict in 2024, and that's why I think arms control is the issue. This war is going to be over by then, so we'll never find out if Donald Trump could have, stopped the war, or whatever he claims he can do.
No, by the way, there's some kind of thing going on in the background. Maybe it's my microphone. I don't know. But anyway, Trump campaigned, and in 2016, I had a lot of hesitations about him until that debate when he just called George W. Bush under the carpet for Iraq, and even saying, "Hey, 9/11 happened on your watch, buddy." And between that and his attacks on the mass media, he was my guy. But then, as you say, when he became president, he just surrounded himself with jackals. And his time out to pasture, he does not seem like he's learned much of anything, and the magic is gone. But
I tell you, he won me over also when he was president about Afghanistan. When Mad Dog Mattis, he got Mad Dog to be Secretary of Defense. So Mad Dog came in and does what every other military establishment person does. Says, "Boss, we can't leave Afghanistan. We got to win." And Trump's like, "Well, we've been there a long time. We're not winning. Just give us more men and free up the rules of engagement. Unleash the dogs," Mad Dog said. And Trump went, "Okay, You want more people? Here's more people. Rules of engagement, rip them up. Do whatever you want to do. Mother of all, bomb them. I don't care. Just get it done. And then about almost a year later, he called Mad Dog in and said, report card. Well, and he said, shut up. In front of everybody, he turned to the generals and he says, you guys suck at war. You're really bad at this. You don't know how to win. So we're done. And I was like, that's the kind of leadership I want. I want an American politician who's not afraid to tell a 4-star general, you suck at war. You're really bad at your job. I would have preferred that he fire them all. Turn around and go, gone, 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 gone. Get out of here. You guys are losers. But I like that aspect of him too. But then he turns around and he folds. He never takes it to the next level. So we'll see. It's tough. I'm not pretending it's easy, but you got to do something.
All right, we'll take a question from the audience. John asks, how bloody is the Ukraine war going to get, and will it hurt U.S. citizens in the coming months?
Well, it's going to get very, very bloody. I mean, we're talking about the culminating point of this conflict. When the cohesion of a fighting force fails, you get collapse. There's going to be a period of time where they're not able to defend themselves. And at that point in time, with the amount of firepower that Russia is bringing to bear, there's going to be great suffering amongst the Ukrainian troops. We know that Ukraine's running out of artillery ammunition sometime this summer. There's nothing anybody can do about it. And that, combined with just the relentless pressure that Russia's placing on the Ukrainian forces along the entire battlefield. Everybody's focused on Bakhmut right now. But the fact is, the Russians are putting the pressure everywhere. And there's a real possibility that Ukraine will double the amount of dead before this is over. So if we're talking 300,000, by the time this thing's done, we're talking about 600,000 or more. That's a real possibility. So it's going to get bloody. Fortunately, the civilians, the Russians, the way they've been fighting this conflict, they've sought to minimize. I think, depending on the numbers, 9,000 to 12,000 civilians, that's a lot. And I'm not ever trying to minimize that number. That number sickens me. But I just want to remind people, when we liberated Normandy in World War II, the great Normandy invasion, the Free of France, we killed 60,000 French civilians. A lot of people don't reflect on that number. We killed 60,000 French civilians to liberate, because that's what happens in war. When you have large-scale ground combat of a combined arms nature in an area that's heavily with a dense civilian population, it tends to be about a 1-to-1 ratio between combatant death and civilian deaths. But if you take a look at it, we've got this huge number of Ukrainian military deaths. We have a significant number of Russian military deaths, and we have this relatively small number of civilian deaths, which tells you that the Russians aren't the mass murderers that everybody makes them out to be. They're not the war criminals everybody makes them out to be. That Russia is actually fighting this war better. I just ask people to, the United States, we're wagging the accusatory finger at Russia. What did we do to Mosul? Go study Mosul. Study the campaign we waged against Mosul. What did we do to Raqqa? That's a town in Syria, a city in Syria, and the way we leveled that. And how many civilians did we kill? And the answer is so many we don't know.
We don't
we can't account for the number of killed, but it's significantly more than 9,000 to 12,000. So all you people accusing Russia of these crimes, back off. Russia's actually fighting one of the most civilian sensitive conflicts in modern history.
Yep. And it's amazing the complete and total disconnect between how the media covers what's going on versus versus what's actually happening. And it's amazing to me how cowardly so much of the conservative media is about these things. It's like these are the same people who've lied about everything else under the sun. And you think that on this, they've got a point there. Yeah, fat chance.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, won't get fooled again, according to George W. But I think my camera just went I moved around too much.
It's refocusing. It'll take a moment.
Yeah, I confused it. I did the juke and the jive, but no, the establishment doesn't know how to tell the truth. Look, let's just look at what Joe Biden did in July of 2021. Ashraf Ghani, the Afghan president. Let me see if I can get that on my hand and bring it back to my face. Did that make it worse?
It didn't help at all.
Well, sorry guys. This is what happens when you have a home camera. But
is that what you're using as a home camera? Get a webcam, man.
Well, it's a webcam. It's a good one actually. It's a Logi cam or whatever, but
probably the same exact one I'm using.
But I don't have. Yeah, what I meant is I don't have a camera crew that can focus on me. I don't know what's going on. I apologize for this.
You're fine.
Okay, but we'll just listen to my words. In July of 2021, Ashraf Ghani called up Biden. They had a conversation. It's public record, and Ghani said, "Look, I had 20 to 30,000, Taliban type guys coming over the border. We can't stop them. It's all over. Unless you bring in the Air Force and you bomb and you do all this stuff." And Biden said, "Whoa, stop. What I need you to do is go on TV and radio, and you and your generals need to tell everybody everything's going to be okay. It's all under control. Nothing to worry about." He said, "You need to tell them this, even if it's not true." And that's a direct quote, even if it's not true, because the goal of the Biden administration was perception management, not telling the truth. And this is what Biden does with everything, especially on Ukraine. It's about shaping perception. It's not about telling the truth. And the media plays into this game because the media can't make money if they don't have their sources. The media isn't, this 24-hour news cycle is all about competition for headlines. And so for everybody to be competitive, they all have to have their own sources inside the establishment. And the establishment's built to give them this information. The people who don't play the game, like Julian Assange or Jeffrey Sterling or John Carricow or others who have gone to jail for this sort of stuff, are the ones that aren't allowing themselves to be managed, but they seek the truth without being managed. But the people who play the game are receiving this information from the establishment, so they can't bite the hand that feeds them. If their job depends on them to generate headlines repeatedly in a 24-hour news cycle, they need the government to give them those headlines. So they will say anything that they become stenographers. They're not journalists. And that's how you manage perception. You manage perception by putting this nonsense out there. And that's what they're doing. Man, this is disturbing to me.
Yeah, sometimes there's places that some will go and then there's others those same won't. Like Tucker Carlson, he can be real courageous on some issues, and there's other places he just won't touch. Daniel Lawless asks, can you explain more about how the administration, perhaps Boris Johnson, derailed the peace process early on in the conflict?
Yeah, but what makes the Boris Johnson thing even more relevant is to understand. Remember, we get to this whole thing about Russia's unprovoked act of aggression. Now, I'm not going to get too much into Article 51 of the United Nations Charter and what preemptive collective self-defense means. But what I am going to say is that if Russia's job in going into Ukraine was to destroy the Ukrainian army and to capture Kiev and kill Zelensky, they did a horrible job because but if their job was to bring peace about as soon as possible, they actually did a fantastic job, because by going in the way they did, they compelled the Ukrainian government early on to engage in peace talks. By March 2nd, they had a peace negotiation meeting in Gomel in Belarus, and they had 3 in rapid order. And then they had a final deal that was going to be signed on April 1st that would have ended this war, ended it, terminated it, done. But the deal would have had the Ukrainians saying that Crimea is Russia forever, and that the Donbass and the Lugansk and Donetsk region is now independent of Ukraine. But Russia would leave all the other territory. Russia would allow Zelensky to stay in power, wouldn't demilitarize. Ukraine would have to commit to not joining NATO. But this war could have ended that quick. But the interesting thing, when this war started, everybody, myself included, thought this thing was going to be over quick. There's not a person that thought this thing was going to go long. General Miley, Mark Miley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, briefed Congress 72 hours. The William Burns, director of the CIA, assessment said 1 week. That was my assessment, 1 week. And we were all right. If Russia came in doctrinally, fighting war the way they're supposed to fight wars, they would have swamped the Ukrainian military, and the war would, be a lot bloodier, but it would probably be over by then. But that's not what Russia was in the business of. Russia doesn't want to destroy Ukraine. Russia actually views the Ukrainians as fellow Slavs, and they don't, they don't want to bring unnecessary harm to the Ukrainian civilians or the infrastructure and all that. So they came in, pressured them into these negotiations, and they were going to get the early peace treaty. But that NATO took a look at this and said, wait a minute, Russia didn't win in 72 hours. Maybe Russia's weak. And then Russia withdrew troops from around Kiev, and they went, look, they're retreating. They weren't retreating. It's a good faith effort to send a signal to the negotiators. When we say that we're going to withdraw from the territory that we've occupied, we're meaning it. And here's a confidence building measure. Leave Kiev, leave Sumy, back off. And now we'll leave the rest of the stuff when you sign the treaty. But we in the West misinterpreted it. We said Russia's weak. And so rather than sign this treaty, we said, no. Russia's weak now. We've accomplished what we wanted to accomplish with the precedent of destabilization. We need this war to go on. So Boris Johnson flew and basically cut Zelensky off at the knees. And now here we are, a year into this conflict, 300,000+ dead Ukrainians, 20 million displaced people, $1 trillion of infrastructure, all because our mission isn't to help the Ukrainian people. Our mission is to use Ukraine as a proxy to bring down the Russian government.
All right, I'll take one more question from chat. I'm looking up at Rumble now, and please thanks. So I think it was also on YouTube. Says, first the USA invests greatly in helping Ukraine, then Russia beats Ukraine decisively. How does the USA save face? And by the way, someone else also posted, wow, this is still live. Yeah, we gotta be mindful of your time, Scott. So thank you so much for joining us. But go ahead and let's address that question, and maybe I got one more for you, and then we'll call it a night if that's okay.
Sure. Well, look, if you have people who have questions, I'll be more than happy to answer the questions. But on saving face, again, I come back to Afghanistan. How many times did a general officer sit before Congress and say, Afghanistan is existential. This is Al-Qaeda, this is terrorism. We have to fight them over there, or I'll be fighting them here. We're never leaving Afghanistan. We're going to be there forever. Commit. Gone, we're gone. Was it embarrassing? Sure. But we got over it because we can spin it any way we want. Same thing's going to happen in Ukraine. We're saying Russia can't win. Russia can't do this. Russia can't do that. Russia can't do this. Suddenly Russia did all of that. They won, and we're gone. And we'll spin it. We'll come up with some other things. But, America, we lost face in Vietnam, doesn't it? How do you fight a 10-year conflict in Southeast Asia, lose 58,000 troops? And then, what did Nixon do? Peace with honor. And then 2 years later, Saigon falls. We lost face. It's not the end of America. Losing face doesn't mean that our country goes away. We're going to lose face in this, but the good news is that the Russians aren't in the imperial business. I know we say they are, but they're not. Russia's in the secure Russia business. And once they solve the Ukraine problem that we created, they're going to be seeking terms of peaceful coexistence, and we will find a way to peacefully coexist with Russia in Europe. The Europeans will also find a way to do that. And this will be water under the bridge. We'll move forward and find some other stupid adventure like Taiwan. Because we're good at shifting gears. No sooner than did we get embarrassed in Afghanistan that we plug into Ukraine. And I can guarantee you, no sooner than we get embarrassed in Ukraine, we'll be plugging into Taiwan.
There were some people that had suggested that, but I'm getting a lot of feedback, but there were some people that had suggested that we got out of Afghanistan just to start making ready for this misadventure in Ukraine. Do you think there's something to that?
The problem is that Afghanistan didn't take that many resources. It's not like Afghanistan was a resource sump and just taking all the resources that we had. we got out of Afghanistan because Trump had put the Biden administration in a bind with his negotiations, and the Biden administration had inherited a negotiation already underway where certain commitments were made, and there just wasn't a chance for the Biden administration to change this around policy-wise, so they had to execute that policy. But if Trump hadn't done those negotiations, those early negotiations, Biden would have stayed in Afghanistan. We'd still be in Afghanistan. We're still in Syria. It's not like we had to get out of Syria to do Ukraine. We're still in Syria. We're still plugged into Iraq. We'd still be plugged into Afghanistan. I think the two are totally separate, parallel activities that don't have any strategic relation between each other, because it's not like we weren't. It went back when we had 150,000 troops in Afghanistan. That would have been a competition for resources. We had scaled it down considerably. And no, I think that this was more about the Biden administration not being able to reverse the policy initiatives towards withdrawal that had been initiated by Donald Trump, as opposed to some sort of brilliant 3D chess where Biden's like, in order to make Ukraine happen, we have to get out of Afghanistan first. First of all, he's not that clever. None of them are that clever. This just happened because it happened.
All right. Now, getting back to talking about the strategy and tactics of the anti-war movement, one of the things that is critical for any political organization to do to be effective is to take a scalp, to get a politician and say, we did that, and then the other politicians start to look at that and go, ooh, there might be some political force behind this. Now, I don't know how much thought you've given to targeting people in any particular place, but I'll tell you, in Michigan, we have a complete airhead, CIA analyst, swamp creature, carpetbagger, came to Michigan to run for Congress a few years ago. Now she's running for an open Senate seat for the U.S. Senate. I don't know if you know Alyssa Slotkin. This woman is so stupid. She told on air in a debate, she was asked about, should the U.S. get involved militarily in China and Taiwan affairs? She says, oh yeah, I'd be happy to put American lives at risk for Taiwan. On air, this is what she says. Now she's running for U.S. Senate. Any thoughts about any political organization that might be in development, or maybe hopefully is more than a brainstorm at this point, that might be looking for a candidate in a swing district who isn't particularly attractive to even the Democrats, by the way? That's the other thing. They think she's a moderate. They don't like her. They think she's too average, too conservative. So she may have a fair amount of enemies in the left and the right, and may have a tough race in front of her. Have you given, and I guess maybe just broaden this up just to say, in general, have you given any thoughts to looking for any kind of particular political target that might be a place to focus fire at?
Well, the problem is that we only have one election cycle before 2026 comes rolling around. So it's 2024. So it's got to be all politicians, not just one, all, every single one of them out there. There's no safe seat. And that's literally the slogan. When it comes to arms control, there's no safe seat. Every seat's on the table. And you've got to get people to line up and say, if arms control isn't your number one agenda, then you don't get our vote. And the thing about it is, what people need to understand is there's even a safe seat. If you take away enough votes, it's not a safe seat anymore. And people need to be primaried. People need to be challenged. There has to be this litmus test. Slotkin, I think I do agree that if you're going to say that, resources are a thing for the PR campaign, because you need to. I don't think you'll be able to have the scalp, because the scalp doesn't come till after the election, but you can have the target. And so if you have some high profile targets out there that are saying, we're coming after you, and this is what we're doing to Slotkin, this is what we're doing to this person, this is what we're doing to that person. You pick them across the board, not just all Republicans, but you pick Democrats, you pick Republicans, you pick high profile people like that, and you say they're going down. And as people start to see, if Slotkin gets primaried and this becomes an issue in the debate, she starts to fumble and look stupid, as again, if you pick the right people with the right topics, that should happen. Other candidates are going to look at that and say, man, we don't want any part of this nonsense. We'll commit to to a litmus test or something like that. But I don't think we have time for a scalp. If we had 2 election cycles, sure, pick some scalps, get some scalps, get some. Because part of the book, Waging Peace, I talk about, you got to learn how to win. We don't know how to win.
You seem very certain that 2024 has to be the deadline. Why is that? What happens if we don't get this done by 2024?
The treaty ends at 2026 and we all die. If people don't understand the importance of arms control, then this conversation is not going anywhere. The last remaining arms control agreement between the United States and Russia is currently suspended, but it's going to, both sides have committed to adhere to this, to the caps and to the control. But when 2026 rolls around, February 2026, the treaty expires, there's nothing to replace it. And there will be no other arms control in place, and the whole thing goes to hell in a handbasket. And there's a real risk at that point in time that if that treaty is gone, then the United States are going to begin testing nuclear weapons again, because we have to prove the surety of our nuclear arsenal. And when that happens, the Russians start testing, then everybody starts testing. And then we no longer have inspectors in place, which means we have no confidence on the number of warheads the Russians have. So we're going to immediately reverse everything that we committed to in the lies that we told. So all the B-52Hs that we decommissioned, be recommissioned. All the Trident tubes that we decommissioned, be recommissioned. We're going to double the amount of nuclear warhead available on deployed systems almost overnight. And the Russians will go, holy, and then they're going to start forward deploying their stuff. And then we're going to get paranoid. Then a mistake's going to be made. And that mistake's going to kill us all. This is what I'm talking about. This ain't a game. This ain't theory. This is reality. We've done it before. We know how this works. We know what's necessary to stop it, and it ain't happening. There's no negotiations taking place right now. None, zero. They're not talking. So that treaty is going to end in 2026. And when it does, there's nothing there to replace it. It takes 3 to 5 years normally to negotiate a treaty like this. So we're already behind the power curve here. On best conditions, if they started today to negotiate, we might get an adequate treaty in place for 2026. Or at bare minimum, at least both Russia and the United States could say, we are committed to this new treaty. So what we're going to do is voluntarily extend the caps going on. Even though the first treaty expired and we can't extend it, we're going to voluntarily continue it until this new treaty kicks in place. But we're not even talking about a new treaty right now. None, zero. This is why it's so important. 2024 is the election. That's it. If we miss this opportunity, if we get like-minded people right, if the same Congress and same presidential mindset goes into 2025, it's all she wrote, man. It's over. So that's why 2024 is so important.
Yeah, you said recently not a single possible course of action is possible today because of russophobia.
Yeah.
And I see your point. Although, I mean, there might be any other reason why people might need to take this issue seriously, even though they don't like, even though they improperly don't like Russian people, for the sake of our humanity's survival.
Well, I mean,
but it's a serious issue, though, is it not?
Well, again, when people say, what can I do? First of all, none of this is going to happen simply by me doing this stuff. People are going to have to get out there and get motivated too. But you got to break down this russophobia, because right off the bat, people are going to say, well, Putin's a bad man. The Russians are bad people. The Russian nation's bad, a threat. Ritter wants arms control to weaken America. And we got to, wow. Okay, so we're all going to die. What I'm doing right now, one of my primary efforts, in addition to trying to get some sort of national impetus towards arms control, is to attack russophobia head on, straight on. You held up my book, Disarmament, the Time of Perestroika. And that book isn't just a history of the INF Treaty. It's a template of hope, because that book talks about how we overcame every hurdle that was thrown in front of us to implement this treaty that I believe you all are alive today because of it. and I talk about how, I mean, I use my personal journey. I'm a guy that spent 2.5 years in the deserts of 29 Palms learning to kill Soviets. That's all I did 24/7. I slept, I breathed, I dreamed, I ate. Everything was about killing Soviets. Then they turned around and set me loose in the Soviet Union to do arms control. And the transformation of my attitude was amazing, because in basically a 6-month period, I went from wanting to kill these people to, why in God's name would we ever want to do this? And I did it by educating myself about the reality of the Soviet people, the Russian people. And I did it by meeting people and talking to people and engaging in conversations. And I think that whole process worked. Look, it worked with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan went from being an ardent Cold Warrior, ready to, remember he joked, the missiles are flying, and turned around. And in June of 1988, he went, when they ratified the INF Treaty, he was in Moscow, and he met with some Soviet students who said, "Do you still view us as the evil empire?" He said, "No, we've moved on. I view you as friends." Wow. So that was then. Today, we're not talking like that anymore. So, one of the things that I'm going to do to help create a process of breaking down russophobia is, this book is being published in Russia. And I'm going on a book tour in Russia. And I'm going to a lot of Russian cities, and I'm meeting with a lot of Russian people to give them the same message about how they need to start having a conversation with Americans. And I'm not talking about the government level, I'm talking about the people level. People talking to people. What the nature of the conversation is, that's up to them. But I just need Americans to start interfacing with Russians, and Russians to start interfacing with Americans. And we got to break down this russophobia stuff. Because if we start viewing each other as human beings that have the same fears, the hopes, the dreams, they laugh, they cry, and we realize we're sort of on the same ship. And if it hits the iceberg and it sinks, we all die together. There's no American ship and Russian ship. This Earth is a ship for all of us. And so that's going to be my short-term effort, is to start breaking down the russophobia, and in the process generate excitement about the importance of arms control. And I have this basic organizing, I don't want to call it a gimmick, but everybody has to have an objective. You're climbing Mount Everest, you want to get to the peak. So I want to have, and back in June of 1982, there was a 1 million person rally in Central Park, New York City. 1 million people got together for arms control, for disarmament. They weren't protesting against something, they were protesting for something. It was a rally for it. And 5 years later, we got the INF Treaty that saved the world. So anybody who says that rallies don't work, I think that sometimes they do. And that rally helped break the political gridlock and liberate politicians to think creatively about arms control, and that gave us the INF Treaty. There's a direct cause and effect relationship. So on June 22nd, 2024, I'd like to put another 1 million people or more in Central Park, or maybe put them around the country, coming out that same day, not protesting against something, but saying arms control is what we have to do. And if you get enough people out there making their voices heard, now you're a politician going, wait a minute, they just put how many million people in the streets, and they want arms control? And if we don't do it, they're not going to vote for us. And I'm in a swing state where if I lose 15,000 votes, I'm not going to get elected. You're going to see a lot of politicians suddenly go, let's talk about that arms control thing. Let's see what you want. What are we talking about? So that's where, but in order to do that, I have to make the American people believe that it's an incompetence. So that's the process. We're going to go to Russia. We're going to do this tour. We're going to try and turn it into a documentary film that can be taken around the United States and shown to different communities, including in Ann Arbor. And because I've met with the Ann Arbor, peace movement, anti-war movement, hopefully becomes anti-nuclear, pro-disarmament movement, and they want to participate. They want to be part of this. And I've met with so there's a lot of nodes out there, and if we can get everybody start this process of breaking down this wall of russophobia, that eliminates that ignorance-based fear that empowers decision makers. You see, if we're ignorant about Russia, then we can be told to fear Russia. And if we fear Russia, then policies such as our current nuclear posture make sense, because of course Russia's evil, Russia's bad, Russia's a threat. We need this. But if we eliminate the ignorance by opening up the floodgate of information, knowledge is power, man. You eliminate the fear, and now you look at the policy for what it is. A horrible, horrible risk to the future of mankind. And then you can empower yourself politically to change that policy. So there's not much time left, but it's as I said, it's a hell of a race, and it has to be won. We don't have any choice.
Well, I certainly wish you the best. Oh, something's going on in the background. I don't know if it's your microphone or mine. Maybe as long as the Libertarian Party is not the organizers, we'll get a million people out there. I am just being facetious. And then just to go back briefly too, I was looking when I was looking around for a comment, and I don't mean to be rude. I'm looking apparently at the ceiling. I'm trying to read some other chat messages, and I did see this one. Reminded me what you were just saying. That was one that came in early from Dave. Very sad state of affairs. Russia should be a friend and ally of the West, not an adversary. And and I would say also in particular, conservatives, American conservatives should have a lot to admire in Russia. Certainly it's a Christian country. It has been resistant to some of the things that we're fighting in the culture wars here in the U.S. Not to get into all that stuff, but yeah, it's a movement that needs organization and it needs centralization. And I think, if anything, I think what we learned from this rally in Washington a few weeks ago is it can't be a blob. It has to be an organization with a command structure. As all effective political action really does have. And you got a lot of turf to cover, my friend. So you got a lot of and not a lot of time to do it. So thank you very much, Scott, for joining us for this stream tonight. And I'll be sure to make sure that we can get as many people to get their eyeballs on this as possible. Stick around for a moment if you would. I'm going to end the stream in a moment here, but let's say our proper goodbyes before you go. So thank you again for taking the time. And again, everybody, if you haven't seen Scott's other channels and you want to give him a plug, Scott, you have is Scott Ritter Extra the hub for everything, Scott?
For everything is one-stop shop. ScottRitterExtra.com. So any podcast I do, any articles I write, interviews, they go there. There's no paywall, so it's accessible to everybody.
Yeah, and you were on Substack as well, and it's got links there at ScottRitterExtra.com to your YouTube channel, the YouTube show you do with Jeff Norman. And I know I see you on Judge Napolitano's channel now and again. And I saw you had a great episode, if you haven't seen it, on the Duran, which is another channel that anyone watching who cares about geopolitics should check out as well. So thank you very much, Scott. We're going to call it a stream for the night. As always, guys, thanks for all you do for liberty. And until next time, peace out.